Stryker Brigade, 2nd Infantry Division, have waited for their loved ones to return from Iraq, and it doesn't get any easier in the final minutes either.
You just want them here. It's just anticipation, you know. You just, give me my child.
For a few families, the wait is over as 140 soldiers returned to a ceremony in Fort Lewis, Washington, just the first of almost 4,000 troops expected to return home this month. It's a tradition that soldiers gripe about almost everything, the food, the heat, the boredom, but they don't generally voice opinions about the mission itself, about the broad strategy, at least not when they're deployed in battle. But what about when they come home, the men and women who have witnessed the day-to-day victories and blunders that the media never shows? Brandon Friedman was an infantry officer with the 101st Airborne in both Afghanistan and Iraq. He's now vice chairman of VoteVets.org, and he joins us from Dallas right now. With me in our Washington, D.C. studio is Pete Hegseth. Pete was also an officer in the 101st Airborne in Iraq and is now the executive director of Vets for Freedom. Brandon, let me start with you. Right now, vets groups, both for and against this war, are beginning to speak out. You're one of the groups saying that perhaps our course is not correct. Why do you feel that you should speak out on this?
Well, we feel like we should speak out because the surge is clearly not working. We've secured certain parts of Baghdad, but what that has done, it's caused civilian casualties to go up in other parts of the country, and we feel at this point that there needs to be more of a political and diplomatic solution. That's where we need to focus all our energy now so that we can pull our military to refocus on issues in Afghanistan and Pakistan and on al-Qaeda.
And Pete, how do you see the situation right now? It's somewhat different than Brandon.
Well, I do, and I think the veterans provide the most firsthand, the best perspective on what we can do going forward. You've seen the enemy, we've seen what's happening on the ground, and I take issue with the assertion that the surge is not working. If you look at what's happened in areas of Baghdad and Diyala, and certainly in Anbar province, applying more military power and more forces in a more strategic nature has brought about big results. Streets are safer.
What are the results that you think you're seeing?
Well, they're military results right now, but if you study counterinsurgency, you have to have security and military results on the ground before you can expect any sort of political reconciliation. If a guy can't go from his home to his place of work without being afraid of being killed, then how can you expect him to make the political compromises that are ultimately necessary? We all agree on that. So what Petraeus understands is that we need to use our military to dampen the violence, create an environment in which these Iraqi politicians can stand up and make the compromises. It's happening at the local level with tribal leaders in Anbar and elsewhere coming together, pushing out al-Qaeda, and ultimately that's what has to happen so that we can bring our guys home.
Well, Brandon, what's wrong with that argument?
Well, essentially, we're putting this all on the backs of American troops who are serving 15-month deployments over there. And the Iraqi government has made very little, almost no progress towards political reconciliation between the groups. And what they're doing is they're depending on the American military to keep a lid on all this violence. So they'll depend on us to stay there for as long as we'll stay there. And we could put 500,000 troops in there and we could stay there for 10 years. But it's still not going to guarantee that in the end it's not going to break into a civil war if these groups in Iraq are not willing to come together and find some sort of resolution amongst themselves.
What would you propose, though, to do then, Brandon? If we leave now, many people say that this country will descend into utter chaos almost immediately.
Well, we can't pull out all at once. We need to do a pullout, and we need to do it over the course of around a year, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But we need to put pressure on the groups in Iraq to reconcile amongst themselves. We need to support them politically, diplomatically, and militarily. But we need to do it. We need to do the military part from the margins. We need to help them peripherally, and we need to focus our main effort on the political and diplomatic side.
But what's wrong with that then, Pete? I mean, there's even talk on the people who support the war right now saying you do have to put pressure on the government.
Absolutely.
And maybe the only thing they will listen to is a gradual retreat that says, now you're on your own.
I think it's counterintuitive to believe that if we tell them we're going to leave, that that's going to give them an incentive to work together. If we tell them we're leaving, then they're going to push into their corners, supply themselves as necessary, and prepare for the coming bloodbath. There's also, if you talk to anybody in the military, 1 year in pulling out our troops is just not possible, realistically speaking, especially if we want to avoid the kind of chaos that will certainly come. But you can't, I mean, Brandon mentioned using the military on the periphery. The reality is, in Anbar province, what we did is we cleared Ramadi and we held it, the capital of Anbar province. And in doing so, we provided a security environment in which the tribal sheikhs could rise up and expel al-Qaeda. Without us, without our ability to deliver on the security promises that we've made all along, there's no way that that political reconciliation and political progress ever would have happened. So we can all step back and say it needs to be political, it needs to be political, but anybody that understands counterinsurgency and has been there firsthand knows there has to be, first and foremost, a military security component so that we can ultimately bring about political reconciliation.
Brandon, let me ask you something. I've talked to an awful lot of people who are in active service and veterans of this war in Afghanistan over the past few years. And I have to say, I've heard many more say what Pete is saying than what you are saying. Many more saying, let's stay and get this finished in some positive way. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I'm not sure that I would take issue with that. There was a Military Times poll that was done in February of 2006 that said 72% of the troops said that we should be out of Iraq within a year. And back to what Pete said, he talked about the success in Anbar. I think the success in Anbar is based on the fact that the tribal sheikhs and the groups there have come together politically, and they've solved their own problems. And we have helped them. We've assisted them militarily. But that's not where the surge is taking place. We're surging into Baghdad, and that's where the government's collapsing. That's where the neighborhoods are separating, and that's where you're having all this ethnic cleansing. We also talk about surging into Baghdad. Well, several weeks ago in Qahtaniya, there were 400 people killed in northern Iraq, and that's because of the whack-a-mole effect.
Gentlemen, I wish we could go on with more of this, but I want to thank you both for your time. We're out of time, and for your service as well. We appreciate it. In just a moment, how you can tell us about your week at war, but first...